Hello everyone, welcome back to Todos Santos, episode number 12. So it's been quite a while since the last video, as you may have noticed. I think the main reason for that is that I just played the game too much, and I kind of put too much time into both building and managing assets and also making these videos, and it was to the point where I kind of got burned out with the game, and I basically had no kind of creative inspiration left for this series or for my other series, Alpenglow. And that combined with different things going on in real life and some technical issues, I basically had to take a break for a while, and that's over, and now we are back, and I am feeling very inspired. You'll see this episode is pretty interesting, but it's pretty small scale. But the next few episodes, which I've already started recording, are, well, let's just say there's a lot of new stuff that we do. So I do apologize for the kind of extra long break. I do in the future, if I end up taking a break again or anything, you can follow me on Twitter, and I do occasionally post on there when I'm procrastinating on making videos or something like that. So that'll be down in the description if you want to hit that link and follow me. I'm not super active, but you might see some cool stuff occasionally, and I've been thinking of posting some more screenshots on there. So I hope you'll join me for the rest of this series, because there is a lot of building left to do, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So just another couple quick things before we get into what I'm actually building here, which is kind of interesting. I did want to note that I acquired the Park Life DLC and also the Industries DLC. And while I'm not doing anything specific with those yet, in the future you may want to watch out for me using those, because we're going to do some cool things with them, but not really this episode yet. And one last thing before we get into it, I just wanted to give a shout out to all the mod and asset creators for this game, because I took a break for basically 8 to 9 months I think, and I was a little worried that this save was not going to boot up without a lot of troubleshooting, and I went to load it up the other day, and it loaded with no errors, no performance issues or anything. All the mods and assets, well, almost all the assets were still there. All the mods worked fine, and even ones that had new versions released, like Fine Road Tool and Fine Road Anarchy, worked completely fine, and the transition was completely seamless. So I just wanted to say thanks, any modders, if you're out there watching this. You guys are really cool. Thank you. Okay, so now you may be wondering what this weird little island thing is that I'm building, and this is inspired by something I saw, I think, on Reddit. It's an island in Colombia called Santa Cruz del Islote, which I think in English is Holy Cross Islet. And it's super cool. It's like this tiny little island. I'll put a link down in the description so you can read a little bit about it. But it's really cool. It's like this tiny little island that is very densely developed on top. Well, fairly densely. And because the island is so small and the population is relatively high, it's one of the most densely populated islands on Earth, with the huge population of 1,247 people. So I wanted to achieve that sort of really dense, not quite urban, sort of urban, but mostly like these kind of dense clustered houses with pretty narrow streets. So what I did is I took just the vanilla gravel road and made this, kind of weird looking road pattern, sort of organic, sort of, looks a little inefficient, but probably works fine because it's just people walking on it. There are no cars or anything. And then what I eventually do is there are a couple main avenues that are a little wider in the middle, and then as we start adding more buildings, we're going to use Move It to push them up onto the road so that there's just a little bit of space left in the middle so that it looks more like these kind of skinny pedestrian paths. And what I do is drag just this vanilla pedestrian path across the surface of the road, so that, and because the Sims in the game actually prefer these pedestrian roads to the sidewalks on the car-based roads, they'll actually walk down the middle of the street instead of walking on the sidewalks and being hidden within these buildings. And so basically what I did is I just used the terrain tools to kind of flatten out an area, and then I took just the vanilla key and I drew that all the way around, and we'll remove parts of that later to give some more of a natural feeling on a couple of the edges of the island. And then I used little pedestrian roads from Network Extensions 2 and lowered those down into the water to get a nice smooth, or rather a sharp transition into the key, so that it looks like it's sort of a natural island that has been kind of reinforced to be a little more friendly to this sort of development. And now you can see here, this is kind of like the main, like a main community area. In real life, I think it's basically just housing and a school, but I did want to include that one building on the bottom right, the pink one there, I kind of imagine is like the island's only store or something like that. So this is, maybe it's like a store, restaurant, community center, that kind of thing. And it's also attached to this concrete park, whereas most of the island is sand or dirt or grass or vegetation or something like that. I wanted to go for the feeling that a lot of this island, the infrastructure is pretty minimal, because I imagine it's probably expensive to bring materials out here. So there are like, prefabricated concrete slabs that they bring out to make these concrete areas. And there's not much in terms of infrastructure beyond just the basic necessities. So like there are docks and a little bit of a marina and, just the very necessities for kind of running a community like this. Because basically this is just a place where people live and they commute, anyone who works commutes to the mainland or the old town or something like that via ferries. So this episode is kind of a little bit of a tangent from what we've been doing the last, 11 episodes. We started off in the old town, kind of building up that area, and that's pretty much all finished. That and the little kind of docks area next to it. And then there's that whole stretch of the same island as the old town, which I haven't really done much with. We did the interchange and we did the resort area there, but the rest of it still needs to be kind of developed. And I think that next episode we're going to kind of move on from that for now, because I feel like I'm getting bogged down, feeling like I have to fill in all these areas in order to move on. And that's part of what kind of drained my creative juices, I guess, is kind of feeling forced to do that one part just because I kind of started, doing the rest of it. So my plan for the next for the foreseeable future in this project is to move on from the island, just for now, and start kind of building up the main part of the actual city, because that little island part is just going to be a small part of the city in the end. So I kind of want to give you guys an idea of the scale of the city and how the geography of the city is going to kind of look. So this is kind of really like a tangent episode that we're going to use to bridge the gap between kind of the old town and that whole island and the mainland and the rest of the city. So I don't want to give away too much of what we're going to do in the next few episodes, but I will say that we're going to be kind of starting with the urban core and moving out from that. And eventually we're going to, meet up with this area and we're going to fill all the gaps in, and it'll be just, one continuous city, and it's going to be pretty cool, I think. Here I'm placing the last few buildings on the island, as you can see, and I wanted to make sure that they were dense and kind of clustered together, but that it looked natural, because it's pretty easy to, when you start clipping buildings together like this, to make it look pretty unnatural, where you have like weird angles and curves that just don't look quite right, especially combined with the way the assets are built. Like you'll have roofs kind of cutting into other things, or things just not looking quite right. So I wanted to hand place all of these and just make sure that there's not anything too glaringly obvious. I didn't want to just throw down some buildings willy-nilly. So I did my best to try to make it look like this building was built and then the one next to it was kind of built up against it, trying to keep those weird gaps and angles to a minimum. It definitely happens, but I tried to make sure that nothing really stood out. And here I'm just doing another one of these little parks. I imagine that all these tiles and stuff were brought over at the same time, and they were kind of built at the same time. So that's why it's the same style as the other park we built. But I felt like having one central kind of meeting area wasn't enough. So I thought I'd just put in this little sort of park garden type area. And again, all the detailing has been pretty basic so far, and it mostly stays that way in this episode, other than a few things we do with some docks at the end, which is pretty cool. But the next few episodes, because we're moving into sort of the urban core area, we're going to get some more unique sort of areas to start detailing, and I think that you're gonna like it if you're into detailing, because we get some more challenges and some more kind of interesting terrain and that kind of thing. So hopefully you'll look forward to that, and you'll be able to check in for the next few episodes. I don't think I'm necessarily going to have a schedule for when the next episode is going to come out, because last time I think one factor that led to me getting burned out with the game was taking my schedule a little too seriously, trying to put out, one video a week or whatever I said I was going to do. So this time I kind of want to take it a little more easy and just do what feels right and what feels natural. And hopefully what that means is that we'll get longer episodes, better episodes, just at the expense of being a little less regularly uploaded, which I hope is okay with you guys. I just think that'll be better for both the builds and the series as it gets uploaded to YouTube overall. And going along with that, what I was talking about with kind of minimal infrastructure, I wanted to have these very basic power lines running across, because that's one thing I've noticed flying around on Google Earth and looking at Google Maps and Street View and stuff, is that at least in San Juan, like, there are lots of power lines going everywhere, which I think adds a really nice look, not just in the old town, but really over like the whole city, especially the lower density parts. And I wanted to show that here. And also, you saw me before putting some streetlights like attached to the electricity poles, and I feel like that's something that is really common everywhere, but as far as I know, there's not an asset for that that's a network like that and actually delivers power. Not that I actually need that, because I have a mod that delivers power to every building, but I kind of like to maintain that sort of realism. So I went and tried to do that here, and I just think that works here especially because, again, like minimal infrastructure, like they're not going to put up electricity poles and also lamp posts when the electricity posts themselves work perfectly fine. I also wanted to add in quite a bit of vegetation, because if I'm looking at a picture of it right now, like an aerial picture of it, and there's actually a surprising amount of foliage there, which like I wouldn't really expect, but I think that adds a nice look, especially from above. It's pretty kind of monotone in terms of like color and texture from above, and I think that adding in that foliage adds just these little pockets that kind of break it up and make it look just a little more interesting and varied, which I think is cool. Because one of the main like goals of this city is to make it look fairly realistic, but also like just cool to look at from above. Like, I don't know about you guys, but one of the biggest inspirations and motivations for me in making these cities is like just flying around to cool places on Google Earth or looking at nice photography and aerial pictures of cities. I just think that's like super fascinating to kind of see how all these roads and houses and these places that people like see from the ground and all the time, and like how that all works, but like seeing it from above, I think just adds like a new perspective and makes you think more about like how these things actually work. So I guess my point, I'm kind of rambling now, but my point is that like I want to try to replicate that with that city, or make a city that like is like natural enough to kind of have that work where you could be at ground level looking around in it, and it looks like a city. It's detailed enough to look like a city, but if you zoom out, that sort of, all these little details come together and you get this big picture of like wow, this actually, this looks like a city. It looks like it could function as a city. So that's sort of what I'm going for. I don't think I really, so far I haven't achieved that 100%, but I think really I'm just trying my best to go in and do that every episode, and hopefully eventually, at the end of the series, I'll let you guys be the judge, but hopefully at the end of the series, we'll have this really, realistic looking city, ignoring of course the fact that, the scale's a little off in the game and there's a limited number of assets, but I think we'll be able to get pretty close. Because everyone on this island, basically works on the mainland or on the other, bigger island, I figured that there would probably be a lot of docks, both personal and public docks, for people to use in order to go to the mainland for work or shopping or socializing or travel or whatever. So I think I'm looking again at a picture here of the actual island, and there are some docks. Maybe not as many as I put down, but I just thought it looked cool to kind of have all these docks sticking out, because that's not really something you see often. You'll see like in a marina, it's like kind of one enclosed area. It's kind of like concave, I guess, and you don't really see a lot of like islands. It's kind of like an inverted marina almost. I think it's super cool. So I just wanted to go around and I used all these natural gaps that were left by the building and tried to use those as like patios or docks or something, to attach these actual pier assets to. And you can see there are also some like pier assets that are basically, they don't function as actual marinas, because they're just like boardwalks in LA or something. Like, it doesn't really make sense why they would have something like that there, but just because of the limited number of assets for this thing that I had at the time, I put those down anyway, because again, from the aerial perspective, I think it works fine. And speaking of assets and mods and all that kind of thing, there are a lot of cool mods that have come out in the time I've been away from the game. I think for this series, I'm going to try to avoid downloading too many new mods, just because my save is so old, and it depends on a lot of some of these older mods that are kind of not being supported anymore, or there are new versions or something like that. So I'm going to try to avoid conflicts with things like that. So in this series, and in Alpenglow too, because I've already recorded that whole series, you're not going to see too many of like the newer mods, but I do have a few ideas for a series in the future, which we'll use quite a few of these new mods. I think I'm also going to try using procedural objects again, which has so much potential for detailing, and I just haven't really gotten into it yet. But for this series, you're probably gonna mostly see just these mods that I've been using so far, and you can see the list down in the description. There's a link to the Steam Workshop if you want to click that, if you're interested in any of these mods or assets. I have, however, downloaded many assets over the last few days. I think I went from around 2,000 assets to now about 3,000. I probably won't keep all of them. I'm going to purge my asset list at some point with some ones that I may have changed my mind on. But there are a lot of really cool, especially residential, high-density residential buildings now. And there are also quite a few sets of low-density assets that work really well for this city. So you'll see some of those, but again, with mods, I'm gonna be very careful with downloading new mods with this save, because I really don't want to lose all this progress just for the sake of trying out a couple new mods. And as far as new series are concerned, it's definitely going to be a thing at some point. Basically, the state of Alpenglow is basically I've recorded all the time-lapse, like the actual build, but because the population is so high, it is not running very smoothly at all on my computer. So I've had some trouble recording cinematics for the last few episodes, and also like the cinematic video and the transit videos that I want to do and all that kind of stuff. So it's just going to take some patience on my part to finish up Alpenglow, but once that's all done, I'm going to download some new assets and new mods and start a new series. I have a couple ideas. One of them is like a real world city map, like just building a map and a road system, but not actually building a city, because I don't want to ever really do like replicating a real city, especially a bigger city. I've tried doing it before and it gets old pretty fast for me, so that's not something I'm super interested in. But I think building an actual map and just the whole road system would be a lot of fun, because that's one of my favorite things to do in the game. But my primary idea for a new series is like a really small town, potentially like maybe even a European town, because I've honestly never built a European city in this game. So I think that would be an interesting challenge, and there are a lot of great assets that I've just never even been able to use because I've never built that style of city. But you know, I'm open for ideas if you guys have any ideas. I'm definitely looking to do something, you know, either pretty sparse or pretty simple like a real city map or something like that, or like a hyper detailed but pretty small town. I think both of those sound good. I'll probably do both at some point. But if you guys have any ideas, you know, within those constraints, or just something completely out of left field that you're interested in, let me know, and I will definitely think about it. Because I'm definitely getting to the point where Alpenglow is almost done, and I want to start thinking about getting some new assets for the next series. So this building here is super cool. It looks pretty boring from the front, but you'll see in the cinematics there is this really cool like mural on the back. It's super colorful and just really felt very Puerto Rican to me, so I put that in there as like, this is kind of like the main building where everything that's not like a house or that main shop on the island is. So now we're putting in some of these boats, basically, because I imagine like every family would have at least one boat because they need to leave the island at some point or another. So they range from like, you know, big nice sailboats and stuff, also to just little rowboats and that kind of thing. And most but not all of those boat assets, I believe, actually stick to the water level, and so they look like they're floating, which is, I don't know how that works in terms of like modding it, but it looks super cool, and I think being able to have that feature is awesome. And it's been around for a while. I remember I had assets years ago that were like that, so it seems pretty advanced, but it's, you know, it's been around for a while. Really cool stuff. So now you can see this aerial view. I think it's looking pretty close. Comparing it to an actual aerial image of the you know, real life island, I think it looks pretty good. The only thing I'm not happy with is the surrounding like water area is a little off. I think I was going for that, using that grass as seaweed. That's a little too dense. And I think it needs some more. I'll put in some more sand or something to make it look a little more realistic in terms of like the underwater look. But I think when you're actually down there in the city, and also, or not in the city, but on the island and looking at the island from above, I think it looks super cool. And it looked a little weird just to have this one big island, so I added a couple of these smaller, pretty rocky ones. Like I imagine the ocean has been like wearing away at these, and these happen to be like the rockiest areas that are left and are kind of resisting that erosion. And they have this last little like bastion of foliage there. And we finally get to use these, well, you'll see them in a second, but we finally get to use these coconut tree assets, which are just like, not these, but they're the palm trees that like stick way out over the water, and they have these weird bends and stuff. They're super cool. Yeah, those right there. I just think those are like, that just screams like Caribbean to me. So really quickly here, I'm basically putting this ferry dock at the end of the map where we're not going to build anything, and I just use that as kind of like this invisible destination. And what we do is we add, someone created assets that they function as ferries, but they're like surfers and like, you know, recreational boats and that kind of thing, which is just so awesome. So I kind of created this really windy route along the shoreline, and we just have these recreational ferry vehicles going around, like windsurfers and parasailers and stuff going along near the shoreline which I think adds, a lot of life. So that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. Again, I'm sorry for the very long break in between episodes. Hopefully that won't happen again. And I can't wait to see you next episode in Todos Santos, where we'll be moving on to the urban core. Thanks for watching.